and welcome to Leaders in Conversation with me, Anni Townend, podcast host and partner to executives, leaders and their teams, co-founder of Collaboration Equation with Lucy Kidd and of Walking Partnerships with Lucy Kidd and Natalie Sherring. Leaders in Conversation is the podcast in which leaders weave together the threads of their life and leadership stories, the people, the places and experiences that have shaped them, their values, beliefs, passion and purpose to encourage and inspire you to be even more confident and courageous in your leadership. If you're not already, please do subscribe to the podcast, review and share it. Thank you. Today's guest is Asad Dhunna, founder and CEO of the Unmistakables. In our conversation, Asad offers valuable insights into creativity, bravery, humour and spirituality. Asad, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Annie. Nice to be here.
It's lovely to have you here, and I'm excited for our conversation, having met you in person for the first time on our Walking Partnerships Day and having had the opportunity of hearing you introduce yourself through your name, which is something that quite often I invite leaders and their teams to do. We all have a name, but one of the things that I've learnt is that the name we have or the name that's written on our email address and or that we're called at work is not actually the name that we are known by or know ourselves by. So I would like to start by inviting you to share something of you through your name.
My name means lion in Arabic. Until the age of 4, I remember going to school, and at home I was called Asad. So how you would say my name if you're living in India or in the Middle East is Asad. When I got to primary school, I remember someone saying, "Oh, it's Asad. Where's Asad?" And I was like, "I don't know who that is." And then I realized that was how I was pronounced. And I think I just co-opted it fairly quickly and thought easy enough, just do that, say it as you spell it and spell it as you say it. But I think it did create a bit of a disconnect between who I was at home and how you grow up in an environment and then what happens when you enter, for me, schooling and then the working world. And I find names fascinating because I'm going through quite a lot of my parents' things at the moment, and their names evolved when they moved here. And they dropped certain names, added certain names. Mine was Asad at home, and it still is amongst my siblings and my immediate family, but it's, Asad at work.
And your last name, Dhunna, is that one of the names that your parents therefore kept? Or is that one of the names they picked?
No, my dad's name when he was in India was Abdul Rashid Harun Dhunna. And when he came here, his working name was Rashid Dhunna. At home, he was Rashid. That's what the post came as. But he was Abdul Rashid Harun Dhunna. And I always found that fascinating of why did he pick Rashid? Was it easier because Abdur versus Abdur, whereas Rashid is easier to pronounce. And then when my mum got married to him in India, her Indian passport said Mumtaz. Her name was Mumtaz Abdul Rashid Dhunna. But then when she came here, the Abdul Rashid dropped out, and I wondered if it followed his dropping of the names.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Immediately saying something about who you are through your name and the backstory of your name. And I know from having read your various posts on LinkedIn, Asad, that both of your parents have died. Your mum quite recently and your dad previous to your mum.
Yeah, 18 years ago. So I'm in this place that I think many adults get to in their life. And I always say this is the order it should be in. But I've got to a point where I'm an orphaned adult. And I've had lots of conversations over this year with people who've been through it or lost one parent of, do you finally become an adult? Do you become an orphan? I love the book, The Orphaned Adult, which then became the thing. But it's happened to me fairly early in my life, pre-40. And it shapes a lot of your outlook of how you see the world and what certainty, safety, security looks like.
How has that shaped you? Your father dying and your mother more recently, but in particular, your father dying when you were young.
Yeah, when I was 18, it impacted me a lot because it was just 2 months before I went to university. And there's so many memories that get ingrained. And they say that this happens when you're in that really heightened grief state. You remember things sharply. And I remember an uncle. And when I say uncle, like they're probably not a blood uncle. They were just like someone in the house who came to visit. And he said, obviously, you're not going to go to university now because you're going to look after your mum and be at home. I said, no, like my dad really stood on education. That was really important for him and what he instilled in me. And so I did go to university, and it was a very raw time to go to university. I remember being very confused. And then I look back and it was confusing for everybody because the constellation of our family was changing. And then it was adding physical distance into it. And I think what happened for me was I just dove into studying and working, and that became a really helpful distraction from the grief that was underlying. And the grief that sits beneath father-son is different to father-mother, is different to mother-daughter. The connections are all different. My dad died quite young. He was 65, and he had health challenges, a lot from stress at work. I think he overworked. And how that's then impacted me is it's made me very conscious about my relationship with work and where my default might lie based on what I observed growing up, what the role model was. And then in the context of shifting gender norms in the world, I think it's had that impact on me to be mindful of it and help you understand what's my perspective, who do I want to be, what can I absorb from what he left behind. And then when you lose one parent, they can become idolized because they get immortalized in some way in the memory. But I've done things since then, and I've really tried to reclaim the grief. So things like when birthdays come around, his birthday anniversary, the anniversary of the death, Father's Day, I used to really shy away from it and just ignore it. And then this year I posted on Father's Day on LinkedIn that I bought the car that my dad had growing up because I love cars. And it was always a memory. Like I'd always just remember these old Mercedes. Every time I saw one, it would make me think of him. And now I've got one. I wouldn't say it's the best decision I've ever made, but I don't think I've done it for rational reasons.
What else have you learnt about grief and facing into grief and up to grief, grieving for your father?
I think what I've learned is you can put it off for as long as you like. It will come and get you. And I think in the world that we live in, like the West, where it's that productivity and getting stuff done, it can become quite easy to distract yourself from it. But it's always sitting there. And I remember reading a couple of quotes, and I live by quotes and books. One was, death is hardest for those who are left behind, or the hardest thing about death is for those who are left behind. And I really think that is the case. And then the other thing is, I remember reading about how people don't want to enter grief because they're worried about where they might end up. And the falsehood is you're already on that journey. So it's not about entering in. A very good friend of mine, Laurie, and a coach of mine, Suki, both recommended a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And I had it on my shelf for the longest time. And it wasn't until my mum passed away, or around the time I knew it was the final days, I just picked it up and inhaled the book. And there's so much in there about what grief does to you and how it impacts you as a human and as a leader, and what it means for how you show up afterwards.
What a great book title, The Wild Edge of Sorrow.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think Suki told me about it and I bought it. And then when everything happened, my friend Laurie just said, I'm sending you a book. It's coming in the post. Don't need to think about it. I opened it and I thought, the universe has sent me a signal to do it. And then I think I gave one copy away. It's raw. Sorry, it's very raw.
Yeah. And it is sorrow, isn't it? I've also lost both of my parents. My father died prior to my mother, and both had good deaths, and they were both elderly, but not that made it or makes it easier for me. And the experience of grief is more acute at particular times of year when I'm remembering them, times that I may have spent with them, or the time I spent with them in the run-up, particularly to their deaths, and had the privilege of being with my mum, with my sister as well, when she died. And that only made me more sad that I hadn't been with my dad when he died.
Okay, yeah. My dad passed away overnight in our home. So I was there when he passed away, and I was in the house when my mum passed away. And so it's a strange feeling when you're there, very hard to describe to people. But I think there is a general curiosity that people have of what happens. And you really, I don't know how it was for you, and I'm sorry to hear about your parents. For me, you almost feel the soul leaving. That was the real feeling I had when my mum passed away.
I felt very similarly being with my mum and my sister noticing before I did that mum had passed away. And for the first time, I knew and understood that phrase, the passing away, because it did feel, just as you've described, that she passed away, but that it was a passing away. I didn't feel her go the moment that my sister felt her go. And I can remember my sister saying to me, we probably should go and tell somebody. And my asking her not to, that I wanted her and I to stay with my mum without there being anybody else there. Because I knew that once we had let somebody know, that other things would take over, and that perhaps my mum needed a bit of time to pass away, is how I felt.
Yeah, I can really understand why you had that moment. I think it's very important to have that kind of time.
Tell me a bit more about what it was like growing up.
It's funny now because there's a lot more language and awareness around difference and race in the UK and in the world. For me, I went to a really nice primary school. It was fine. I never really felt any different, really. When I went to secondary school, things started to creep in and, I feel a bit different. But a very mixed school, and it felt very integrated, in honesty. Very sport-centric school, which I'm not amazing at sport, but got involved, and very academic school. And I ended up in that kind of academic set of school friends. So I ended up in a really good friendship circle that carried me through. And it was good. I don't remember bad things about outside. I think at home things were always a bit tumultuous because my dad lost his job, and that had an impact on how the family felt. My siblings are quite a lot older than me, so they were moving through life steps and stages. It just changed the dynamic. But in general, I look back and go, I'm very lucky for what I had. I think my parents worked exceptionally hard for the life that they had created, and they were migrants, so they were facing their own challenges. And when my mum was in her final days, she would share a lot more. And I think that I saw this with my dad as well. Something happens in those last weeks, maybe last month, where I think there's a foreboding that exists in the corner of what's to come. And my mum would share about when they moved to this country, what it felt like, when my brother was quite unwell, how she handled some of that and what they went through. And I look at things like the race riots here and the sentiment around migration. I think, gosh, it can go back very quickly. I think just as we've thought we've moved forward, it goes back. And I had always assumed we're standing on the shoulders of giants, we're moving on, but it feels like that isn't always the case. So you've asked me about my childhood, and I've made it about flags and patriotism, but I think it's all linked.
I think it is. And the image I had as you were speaking is of things toppling down, and how challenging it is. Just when we feel safe, things can feel very scary, very fast, very quickly.
It's a real balance. And I learned a lot about identity and belonging through learning about other cultures. Half of my degree is in German, and so I learned a lot about German Turkish literature and the diaspora and how that worked. Studying that from an academic context helped me to articulate what I felt, because we would learn through books about living on a bridge or living in between two places and what that can do for your rooting and your grounding and your identity. And then I would apply that to myself and say, well, I can feel that I'm in two different places. And I think growing up, it was be grateful that we're here. We've done this for you. In reality, they've done it for themselves as well, but it becomes easier to say we've done it for you. And we've come from somewhere that hasn't got prosperity and opportunity. Now, what's changed since then is India has enormous opportunity and prosperity. A lot of the clients I work with are trying to realize that. And the UK doesn't. So there's now this cultural imbalance taking place where I've gone, well, why are we here? What are we doing here? And if you're then being told you're not welcome here, you then filter through, you're welcome here, but those ones are not welcome here. And you say, but that was the same sentiment as 40 years ago. And so what's changed and what is it? What's the undercurrent? So yeah, I think it is incredibly complex when I think back to growing up and what that meant. And I think it does apply in how I then see the world in the business that I run and in the work that I do with clients, to say it's not as simple as we think it is, because the world is moving incredibly fast.
And things are changing all the time, aren't they? Like you say, people moved from India to live in the UK thinking, like your parents, that this would be a better life for them, for their children, better education. You mentioned how important education was for your parents. And something which isn't talked about a lot is class. And my parents were very aspirational for my sister and I, for our education. So education being the way in which we would mix with the right people and be able to get jobs that they would be proud of us being in. I had a moment a few weeks ago when I was working, supporting, partnering a client at a conference, and my name came up on the screen. It took me by surprise. My father would be proud of me, seeing me, my name on the screen. The fact that he never really understood my job. It wasn't the kind of proper job that he had hoped education would enable me to go on to.
Yeah, I think there's that thing, isn't there, when I share about my parents, and I get many people saying they would be so proud of you. And then would they? Because you'll never know for certain. But also the marker of what pride was might be different. So I don't work in a profession that was doctor, lawyer, banker, dentist, failure. Those are your 5 options. And so I'm not those or one of those. But it's interesting hearing you say that, because how do you resolve that? How do you then come to the other side and go, okay, I'm good with that?
For myself, I'm good with what I do because I believe in what I do, which I know you believe in what you do. I believe in the power of conversations and of creating a safe environment in which people can have those conversations, and all the better if they can have them side by side in nature whilst walking, or simply sitting outside if we're not able to walk and talk, but being side by side. You have founded and are CEO of an amazing business. It would be lovely to hear you talk about how you came to found your business and the work that you do.
The genesis of it was I worked in marketing for a long time, and I had clients say to me, how do we understand different audiences, different communities? So at the time I was volunteering for an LGBT organisation. So people would say, how do we understand the LGBT audience? How do I understand Black and brown people? Because they could see who I was and what I was talking about. And I realised that wasn't so easy to answer the question in the system that I was in. And then the other thing that was happening was I was getting to more senior positions and looking around thinking, No one looks like me. And do I belong here? And this is before the DEI conversation exploded in the way that it did, before it entered more of the corporate culture that we see today. And now it's exiting back out. But I let that inform me to say, what could I do about it? And I was in my early 30s, so I think I had a bit of gung-ho energy to me. And I had a mentor who said, give it a go, give it a crack. And so I did. And I set out at that time to look at how can we help organizations understand minorities. And I used to talk about that back in 2018. And then as I spent more time with clients, and that is my approach, I spend time with people listening, understanding, but also suggesting where you could go and what the future can look like. I had more and more clients just say, how do we get this right? We want to be better. We want to grow. And the work we do today is we make brands and businesses more relevant to more people. And we do that by helping them understand what is going on for them functionally. So what are the functional things they develop, their products, their services, how inclusive are they? How well do they reach people? So we'll have a client say, we've got a product, we're not quite sure how that might be perceived or whether that can be used by people with disabilities, for example. We'll help them navigate that. How relevant are you from an emotional context? So what emotion does your brand evoke in people? What emotion do your campaigns evoke? How are you relevant for what's going on in conversations today? And then we'll also look on the inside of how relevant are you for different types of employees? How do you engage them differently? Which again, informed slightly by what I went through. And then societally, based on everything that's going on today, are you relevant on a longer term scale of where the world is going? I love the work that we do because often it's quite big thinking of what might that look like and how do we get there, which is challenging in the current context because lots of leaders are quite short-termist right now and the environment is becoming quite atomized and incentivized around short-termism. But that's the work we do now. So we have some clients who say, how would our brand translate into high growth markets like in India, like in China? How do we get that right, given our center of influence and power is here? How do we navigate things like the empire and what the residue of that looks like today? And how do we do that with confidence? How do we do that with cultural confidence? And I have a team of 8. We're based in London and yeah, love the work we do. It's not without its challenges, I think, as every business owner would tell you. And 7 years in, you face different challenges to 7 months in. But that's the flavour of what we do.
And you're called the Unmistakables. How did you come by the name?
So I came up with a different name, actually, which is probably, I never thought about this, but it's probably linked to the primary school story. So I wanted to call it the Unpronounceables, because if you can't pronounce my name, what do you think I'm saying about your business or brand? And I then got feedback early on that is quite hard to procure as a company if you're going for bigger contracts and things like that. So I thought good to take that feedback on, maybe diluted it a little bit. But I loved the notion of a group of people who are united, wanting to change something. And I loved the idea that we would show up in meetings or with clients and clients would walk away and go, I've just not experienced something like that. And that was unmistakable and that was different. So it's not that we don't make mistakes, we do, but it's about creating something that feels special and feels different. And I got to the name actually through cycling. So one of the things I've realized about myself is my ideas come when I'm moving, they don't come when I'm static. And I think when I got the feedback about the unpronounceables, I just cycled to and from where I used to work, just thinking about it, and then eventually it clicks. And so I wrote it down, did the Google check, looked at the URL, and that was it. Just off we went. And I used to think things like, when you've found a business, you've got to think, what would it sound like if you had someone picking up the phone, like, hello, the Unmistakables, or it's Asad calling from the Unmistakables. And it always invokes a bit of, tell me about the founding story, which is quite nice as well.
It's a great story. And I love that you've reflected today on the connection with being primary school and your name being pronounced differently by some people to what you already knew, and that it evolved into the Unmistakables.
When I really think about it, Annie, I think that in different groups and communities is the conversation people have in their community is often different to the conversation they will have out loud. And there's safety around that. Nowadays in corporate context, we talk about psychological safety and those kind of things. but there is safety in being with your own people and what you open up about. And I think you see that on lots of lenses. It's not just through identity lenses. It could be shared interests, shared passions. But yeah, I think there's something about people who know that their name has been mispronounced in some way, shape or form. Like, we can have quite a laugh about that at work.
And humour is important to you. It's one of the things that you listed along with creativity and bravery and spirituality, all of which in our conversation you are referencing through how you live and lead. How do you use humour in your life and work?
Humour is a funny one, quite literally, because I was in the closet for quite a long time. And a lot of the time I was using humour, and this is not uncommon of gay men, is you use humour as a way to pacify situations, and you play the clown, play the funny one, because it A, gives you a role in the group, but B, can take away any sort of, oh, who are you? Are you a bit different? So you'll often see in films or in culture, the funny gay one could be in the corner making sassy remarks, using humour as a way to say, I'm not a threat to you. And if we laugh together, I lower that threat. And I learned this early on when I did some LGBT leadership training. So gay leaders talking about their experiences. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, I do that. And around the time, a former boss of mine, Holly Ward, who's written on my LinkedIn, if you go to the bottom of my LinkedIn and the recommendations, she wrote, Asad takes the work seriously, but he doesn't take himself seriously. And I look back at that and I smile in the context of how do I use humour, and I've become much more conscious of it. But I think, and maybe it's linked back to my dad, because he was quite a funny person, but I often think to find commonality, humour is a good way through. And it's a good way to look at the absurdity of life and say, how have we got here? What has happened here? And I have a very good friend of mine, Claire, who loves surrealism and absurdism. So we'd often just look at things and go, oh, isn't it just absurd the way that things are, like the way the world moves, the way things happen? And that always grounds me, because when everything feels really stressful, it's how could you find the humour in it? How can you find a way to smile about it and not take yourself too seriously in it? So that's how I use it. And I think I've just become a lot more conscious of it, because the stereotype of the funny gay man could be quite easy to fall into. But then I ask myself, who am I doing that for? It's a weird defense mechanism to not let people through. And what I also learned was, if you are a leader, using humor all the time can actually undermine you, because people want to see seriousness. If you're having to navigate layoffs or very serious situations, but you're styling it through with a laugh, people will perceive that differently.
Yeah, that can be quite hard to know when somebody is being serious or not. And if they don't know you well, I described myself to somebody the other day, I'm quite gullible. So sometimes if somebody, particularly if I'm meeting them for the first time and they are being funny about something, because I'm wired to listen well, and my ambition is that people do feel seen, heard and understood by me. So I'm wired to take people seriously, even though I do like to have a laugh and to see the funny side of things, but not to detract from the seriousness of something. So knowing how people use humour, and certainly when I was being brought up, I often felt that I was being made fun of by way of the questions I asked or the way I thought about something. If it didn't quite fit in with the kind of espoused way of being and doing things. Yesterday, I phoned somebody up to check, because I hadn't heard from them for a while, with whom I'd had some banter. Afterwards, I thought, gosh, I hope that, you know, my intended impact, which was to have a laugh and some banter, which they had initiated, and I'd risen to the occasion, phoning them up just to check that they hadn't been offended in any way. And they were absolutely taken aback that I might have thought, but it is a sensitivity around humour.
I think what you're speaking to is something that I'm observing more broadly in society. You just can't have a laugh anymore. And you see this in comedy circuits. You see this in the way people talk about a comedian like Ricky Gervais. And now speaking up has become democratized. And what you're seeing is more minority groups having voice through platforms like Instagram and TikTok to say, hang on a minute, that's not quite right. And we've lost the mainstream blob that carries us through. The things that set humour in society have become fractured. So when you see that for advertisers, for example, I was reading this morning that advertisers are struggling to put humour into adverts, I think because of the fear of offence, the fear of what that can mean. Some lean in, some don't. And then how does that translate into national psyche of comedy? How does that translate into what we find funny and what we don't? And I think why I'm finding this interesting is when I'm working with clients and we're looking at data sets, for example, of what people find acceptable in the workplace, what people associate with in products they want, in marketing they're interested in. You've got to get a sense of you understand me and you get what's funny for me. And how you do that now is more complex because before, particularly in Britain, there's a lot of pastiche, there's quite a lot of panto, it's quite camp. That is one style of comedy. You have dark comedy, you can have other types, but it's become quite fractured, I think.
I've spoken previously about how I very consciously, when I was 10 years old and went away to school, listened to how other people spoke and quite quickly chose to speak differently. So although somebody from where I was brought up in West Yorkshire would certainly recognise my accent, which is underneath, I very consciously, because I had noticed and observed that people who spoke like me often got the funny parts and got the laugh, which I didn't want to be that person who got the laugh, although I can be very funny, especially when I'm in touch with that Yorkshire humour, which is very particular, but it's probably best enjoyed with the community. You mentioned the community in which you can be yourself in.
I think that's where my root of humour comes from, because I often have felt like an outsider. So back to the absurdity of life and the humour of things, I would look in and think, that seems a bit funny because it's not like that where I am from. And that is cultural difference. I remember when I was 11 and my friend Andrew invited me over and we went round and we had a meal, but everyone had their own plate with their own portion on it. And I was like, why is there nothing in the middle that you just help yourself from and you keep going? And there's not there's more on the stove if you might like it. It's like, it's presented to you. And I'm married to someone who's white English and there are differences and you have to laugh at them. Like we laugh at them through the name of the dog as well. There's these humorous points you have to bring up in life. I think this is probably the grief. Life's too short.
So what do you mean by at the dog?
So the dog's name, like the way people pronounce it here is Gudu, but in Hindi it's Gundu. And Gundu is like little one and it's a term of affection. And when we were 2 years into our relationship, we watched the film Lion. And it's a brilliant film with Dev Patel. And it's a true story about a boy who gets separated from his family and he gets adopted and his life story. And it's amazing. But then there's a scene in it where he's calling out for his brother and his brother is called Guddu. There's this child stood on a train platform shouting, Guddu. And Tom said, I want to get a dog. And I said, we're only going to get a dog if we call it Guddu, because I want to see you stood in a park shouting that name, because I just think it'll be really funny. And it does translate. You get a lot of that's an interesting name. You can with a dog because people call their dogs funny things. So yeah, we do that. And it's like those little things where I just bring a bit of humour because we've just got Guddu. He's like our little family and he is a little Guddu. Like you look at him, you know, he is a Guddu. But then he'll be down in Hampshire with my in-laws and it'd be like Guddu.
And you and Tom, where did you meet?
We both volunteered for Pride in London. So we were organisers of Pride like 2017. Yeah. And then we met in 2018. We met in like volunteering meetings, but we actually first got chatting properly at the old ITV studios on the South Bank. There was a film shoot and Tom was organising some of the film shoot and I was there. I remember it so clearly. We were in the lunch queue and we were getting our lunch with our like trays in the canteen. And then he said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I work for this company, but I'm actually thinking about starting a business." And he said, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea." We got chatting about it. And then, yeah, we've been together for as long as I've also been running a business. So there's a dual tracking. And yeah, we got married last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
A lot of big life experiences. As we draw to a close our conversation, Asad, who and what is the conversation that you're going to have with someone else as a result of our conversation today?
Do you know, there's actually conversations I've been having as a result of the walking partnerships that I've been thinking about quite a lot. So maybe I'll talk about that and then I'll reflect on this one. Is the thing that you shared about the gates and who are you holding a gate open for? And what toll does that take on you and what is it for the other person? And I've been using that with a few people and it's really stuck with me. Who are you holding a gate open for? Because I think as a leader, it is almost a default. Like I've got to hold the gate open for other people, but I have forgotten the toll that can take, whether you want to be doing that, whether that person wants it. So that really stuck with me. And I think from today's conversation, maybe I'll take a bit about the humour, but I feel that's an easy get out. I feel like the thing I want to talk about as a result of this conversation is perhaps the reality of life. I think what I find a bit tricky when I talk about grief is it doesn't feel very accepted as a workplace context to talk about grief. And what I've noticed in myself, and it's due to neurodivergence or just something of life, is when you wake up, leave your home, go and sit in an office, work in an office environment, and then come home, your life has natural boundaries to it. Whereas what I'm noticing when you remove that or you go for hybrids and in the way that we are working now, you lose those structured boundaries. And then when you've got something like grief through your system at that time, that's what I'm noticing is really different. Because I think when I went through this with my dad, it was structured. I went to university, I went to work, and I could go to the office and go, I'm going to park that for now and I'm going to do this. So yeah, maybe I'm going to bring that up and talk about hybrid because it's that wild edge of sorrow. It just pulses through everything. You can't leave it aside.
Thank you. Well, I wish you well with that conversation and having those conversations, because I think what you've touched upon and how we've talked about the experience of grief and how it is woven through who we are and how we live our lives, and some of the scaffolding that perhaps was in place is no longer there, and talking about grief and our experience of grief as you have done today, I know will have helped listeners in perhaps talking about their own grief and experience of loss as well as the joy of being alive.
What a lovely way to look at it. And thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been really nice to be here.
You're very welcome. And as we close the conversation, Asad, what are your key encouragements to leaders and to listeners of our conversation today?
The first is work out what's going on for people. I think we can be so wound up in what's going on for us that we forget what's happening for others. If there are leaders listening to this who are managing quite diverse workforces, also to get under the skin of how people are feeling. There's a lot of nervousness in the country. And I think I'm noticing a lot of nervousness, even in myself. Like I've been running a business. I shared with you last week, like, I'm a bit nervous about coming to Lewis after what I read in the news, like just to talk about it, give it air. And I think the third one is And this is a saying that someone gave to me, which is sometimes you have to let go to let in. And I think that ties into the gate thing that we talked about. What do you have to let go of to let something new in? You let go of someone, but now you're letting in something else. And as you said, they're passing. So there's a linking between passing and letting go, which is also a meditative practice.
Thank you, Asad. And I think perhaps in that last sentence, we have the title of our conversation, possibly around letting go to let in.
Yeah, I like that.
Really lovely. Thank you. How best for people to connect with you, Asad, and to have a conversation with you and to find out more about what you do, what the Unmistakables do, and potentially what you could do with and for them?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way. So just look up my name, Asad Dhunna. And then the Unmistakables is theunmistakables.com. That's the easiest way to have a look at the kinds of things we do. And if you are trying to navigate the speed the world is moving at and you want to feel more confident in doing that as a leader, then it's definitely something we can help with.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Asad. Thank you so much. And thank you to you, the listener. If you'd like to listen to other Leaders in Conversation with me, Anni Townend, do go to my website, annitownend.com. To listen to Finding Your Collaborative Edge, the podcast with Lucy Kidd, do go to our website, Collaboration Equation. If you'd like to find out more about Walking Partnerships, please get in touch with me on my email, annie@annitownend.com. A big thank you to Schmogus Media for the wonderful production and marketing of the podcast, along with Louisa Penny from Penny Writing. I look forward to connecting with you. Thank you for listening to our conversation today, and thank you, Asad, for our wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you.